We start off with a prayer, and by now you know it thoroughly, so you can join in. Om Sahana Votu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditam Astu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May we work together with great energy and vigor. May our study be illumined. May we not unnecessarily argue with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. So we have a subject matter, the Regal path, and we can interpret this in two really different ways. So one way would be referring to the 9th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, which is entitled The Royal Path, actually, the Royal Secret. So what is that? So that's where I'm going to start. So it's the science, actually, the sovereign science and the sovereign secret. So it is Raja Vidya, Raja Guhya, Yoga, or Yoga. So the science. It seems rather peculiar to think that anything to do with spirituality is in any way some kind of science. And yet we have a whole text which is to do with the science of religion. We have to be careful what we mean by religion. We could by religion mean a whole lot of rules and regulations, dogmas, doctrines, traditions, things which distinguish one religion from another. That's one way of looking at it. Some boundaries, and we might trace that etymologically back to religio. But then there's religere, to read again. What does that mean? It means to delve deeper into a subject, so that actually now religion becomes realization. That's something very different. It is going in underneath. We can explain it something like, some people have heard of milk. This is Ramakrishna's example. Some people have seen milk, but others have tasted milk. So the people who really understand it have tasted it. They know the sweetness of the milk or the taste of it. Others have understood milk is white, there's a whiteness. They may even have identified some liquidity. That's if they've seen it. Some have never even seen it. There's an interesting person I once met who told me all about New York. He even named all the streets for me, all the prominent buildings and so on. Then I said, I've never met anybody who knows New York as well as you. Have you ever been there? No, I've never been there in my life. So where did you get all your knowledge from? It's from the all-powerful, omniscient Google, because you can find anything there. And so he doesn't really understand what's going on there. He only understands intellectually, in principle, but actually from an experiential point of view, no idea. So it's like that. And many people talk, wax lyrically on religious subjects. But the key question is, have you seen God? I used this fairly recently. I went for some examination, hospital examination, so hospital appointment. And there were two elders. Elder means teenagers in the Church of Latter-day Saints. And they wanted to go. One came from South Africa, one came from France. And I said, there's one wise person who asked this question and got the answer. Have you seen God? Have you seen the ultimate truth? And most people, when confronted with this question, and the questioner was Naran, who became Swami Vivekananda, well, no, I haven't actually seen. When he came and saw Ramakrishna, asked the question, have you seen God? Ramakrishna said, not only have I seen him, I see him here and now. And you also can see him. That's the possibility. You also can see him means there's a science behind this. And just in science, we take some credible authority somewhere, somebody who's done some experimentation, somebody who has a reasonable hypothesis. We understand the reasoning about it, and then we say, how did you come to this conclusion? And then such a person lays out an experiment. And by laying out an experiment, gives us the opportunity for us to repeat it. Having repeated it, we can discover for ourselves whether it's true or whether it's false. So today, there are great discussions with atheists and theists. Where's your evidence for God? It's a long, it's not just a contemporary modern thing. It's a long, ongoing discussion. As if this was a being who is an object that you can put into a test tube and see, is this alkaline or acid? Or something like that. No. Can you put it in a test tube? No, you cannot. Why? Because it is an eternal subject. And therefore, some technique has to be done. A scientific technique has to be applied. Now, most of our, in fact, all of our sciences are focused on the outside. They're focused on discovering the secrets of the cosmos. And then more subtle science will want to discover, well, how does the mind work? What is the neurology of it? What is consciousness? Delineated as the heart problem. Now, we have to go further than that if we want to find our answer. So our starting point is not, is there some kind of supreme being around us? It is, I'm here, I exist. And having determined I exist, then I have to find out, okay, what is this? What is this existence? And that relentless inquiry will bring us to the point of experience. That's the experiment. And there are many varieties of how to do this experiment, how to go inward. And all of them are to do with some regal path, some regal method. Because the royal being in the human entity is the mind. The mind is the queen bee. Wherever the mind goes, everything else goes with it. And when the mind shuts down, then we have deep sleep. And some of us repeat mantras. It's called snoring. So, and we wake up from it. We come into this differing circle, if you will, and cycle of consciousness, of a waking and a dream and a deep sleep. But behind that, some observer is there, and we register everything through the mind. It's like a telescope. You can look at the stars through a telescope. Telescope representing the mind. You can look at the telescope. This is psychology, introspection. And then you can look away as well, because I'm not part and parcel of the telescope, nor am I part of the objects being seen. I'm an independent entity that has the freedom to look through the mind or not, look through the telescope or not. It's up to me. Without that, I cannot say I'm free. So there's some full and free entity that is able to use the mind, to look through it, to adjust it, to take an instrument called attention and steer it in a chosen direction. So all practice, all of the methods will be to do with the mind, controlling the mind, whether people know it or not. Now, let us take these several dimensions of the mind. We have a feeling dimension of the mind. Most people have it very, very dominantly. And so, can we take that energy and can we channel it towards some being that we find to be lovable because its grace flows everywhere and it is the source of our breath, the source of our life, the source of our heartbeat, the source of our thought, the source of our digestion, the source of the reparation of cells, the source of the sun and the sunshine and the life that it gives. In fact, wherever you look, you'll find an element of rhythm and constancy throughout the entire universe. A pattern, we call it laws. So there's a lawmaker and a lawgiver somewhere that it decides to deliver its grace to us constantly through the medium of time and space. And it is all done through the mind. When the mind is not occupied, when the mind is withdrawn totally, as in a deep sleep, or as in anesthesia, for example, well, then we have a state of peace. There's nobody else to fight with. The fighting only comes when we come out of that state. And when there's more than one person, we decide whether we'll fight with them or whether we'll make peace with them, whether we'll talk to them, whether we'll ignore them. And so these human relations, the energy that we apply to human relations, we can apply to a sense of wonder, adoration, and thankfulness. Now, this kind of method is called Bhakti Yoga. And the more we tune that up, what will happen? The whole obstacle in the way of the self-discovery will be that the mind is occupied with many, many different things that creates disturbances because they're linked to the external things. And the external things create a relationship with what I assume to be me. And yet, the me is also an external thing because the me I register is comprised of a body and a mind. And these are instrumentals. These are the means through which we observe all the objects of the universe. Now, if it's an object like a telescope, we can't say I'm the telescope. So we all fall into the trap of this wrong self-identification. We make a mistake about it. Instead of seeing this body and mind as an instrumental thing, we see it as a fundamental part of me or me myself. But when we go inward in our experiment, we find it's something different. Love of God, called Bhakti Yoga, love of the divine, sets up a personal relationship just as human relationships are set up. But you see, instead of fickle relationships, unreliable, bargaining process, I love you if you love me, when you stop loving me, I stop loving you. And what will I get out of it? This nurturing, this flow of love that I want to come to me. I can take all of that energy and in a non-demanding way, I can steer it toward something which is lovable, whose grace is bestowed on me constantly, always, in this present moment. And I always quote this, and I'm sure people are tired of me quoting it, Joel Goldsmith, who gives a wonderful definition. What is meditation? It's a song of gratitude. Think, a song of gratitude. That divine being, which religion calls God, is here, is now, and is love. Now that's a very different approach to a demanding approach, which says something is wrong and needs to be corrected. Something is wrong, that's the past. Something needs to be corrected, the future. This is saying, no, it's right here, right now. All I have to do is tune myself, tune the attention, that faculty in the mind, toward this. And what will I find? I will find the source of joy, the source of happiness, and so on. I will find a stability there. I'll find this inner experience. And then I have done the last bit of the experiment. I have discovered for myself the validity of this question, is there something there? And have I seen it? And in that, all superstition has to be removed. And there has to be one thing which all of the methods will have in the common. It is the control of the mind. You may think, I am worshipping a deity, but what you're doing is you're controlling the output of the mind, the behavior of the mind, at the deepest level, unconscious level. And you're setting up a habit which removes the misery component called I consciousness, I and me and mine, my own personal thing. Things must flow to me. And so we solve that problem in the most natural way, non-demanding love, which doesn't require repression or suppression. It's easy, it's natural, it's taking that flow and steering it in a much more profound, much more useful direction, and one which is a revealing thing. And when I do that consistently and constantly, the revelation I find becomes a permanent revelation, which we call freedom. I realize I'm not the telescope, I'm the one that's looking through it. Now, the other component, or the other approach, will be in your daily activities, make sure what you're doing doesn't disturb your mind. Again, what is disturbing it? Either it's the past, regret, and so on, or it's the future, creating anxiety because I want some results from the action. When we let that completely go, we now have a state of mental concentration, which says that not only am I efficient in what I do, this is the Bhagavad Gita's point of view, not only am I efficient in what I do, skill in action, but I also have equilibrium of mind. This is called karma yoga. And then again, it's to do with the mind. So the mind is the royal component here. Is the royal path is dealing with the mind, whichever way it is. And then, of course, the regal path leads us again in control of the mind to taking the faculty of thinking, analyzing, deciding, trying to figure out, trying to work out in an analytical way, what is the reality? That is, what is the thing that never changes? And we do it through a process of discernment. The discernment is on the one side, saying this is what I'm not, this is what the reality is not. But on the other side is a positive affirmation. What is obviously flowing through everything, operating in every moving part, in all hands, in all eyes, in all heads, everywhere. All means including this that immediately removes my sense of individuality as well. And then the last, of course, we have the faculty of sitting down and going on a royal route called meditation, where we now go beyond introspection and go into progressive discovery, step by step, revealing each layer at a time, an active state of progressive joining subject and object, so that there is no differentiation between the two, ending up in one thought being present in the mind, and that is called meditation. And when no thought is in the mind, don't worry about it, it's effortless. It'll happen, where even through divine grace of the mind itself, we'll have this ultimate state of non-duality called samadhi. In various stages. There is a savikalpa samadhi, there's a nirvikalpa samadhi, there are various stages within that. But each stage is a revelation that removes this attachment to the outside world and that which is related to it, the instrumentation of it. In the analogy of the telescope, we're not attached to what we see. It's interesting, no doubt. And we're not attached to the telescope. There's no identification with it. And we're free to look through it or not. That is true freedom. So all of them are part of the royal path, the regal path, because they're all to do with control of the mind. But there is one which is specifically mentioned as directly to do with this psychic control. That is called Raja Yoga, also called Dhyana Yoga, path of meditation. And Raja Yoga is what we deem to see as the science of religion. And so Raja Yoga is a fundamental textbook with a wonderful commentary divided into two parts. And one part will be the comprehensive background and introduction to the subject. And then the other aspect of it will be the actual Patanjali Yoga Sutras, which tell us systematically 4 chapters, 4 sections. First of all, the principle of it. Secondly, the practice of it. Thirdly, the gains we may get from it. And finally, how to give the whole thing up and get our freedom, having what is called kaivalya, an isolation, independence. And that's the goal. The goal is to detach myself from the instrumentation. That's not to say I have no use for the instrumentation. Having detached myself, I can now use it as I want. Knowing that I'm not the car, I can easily use it. If I think I am the automatic Tesla, then there's no hope. It just goes automatically, and I assume that I have no part in it. Now, if we take the analogy also of a car, we see that there's a methodology which is applicable to all of these systems. And to understand that, you have to understand something about nature. Nature is what we call, it's a term that we use for the whole of the empirical existence that we have. And this nature has 3 components. Now, it's necessary to repeat this over and over and over again so that we fully understand the composition of nature, but also how to control nature. Don't forget, in Swami Vivekananda's description of the overall picture, each soul is potentially divine. The goal is to manifest this from within, controlling nature, internal and external. There we are. You control nature, internal and external, through this capacity to control the mind. Because you're controlling energy in the form of psychic energy. It's called psychic prana. And so, this whole endeavor is to do with the mind. Our problem is the mind. Our solution is also the mind. And the mind also has these 3 components, what we call sattva, rajas, and tamas. That is, sometimes there's a state of inertia and laziness. We can easily see it, identify it. Not so enthusiastic today, a little dull, maybe a little sleepy. It has its use. Without it, we wouldn't go to sleep. And then something that is projected, something that's highly active, an enthusiasm to do something, to achieve something. But the problem with this and the former one is they're all out of self-interest. And self-interest is that one thing that creates difficulties and pain for ourselves. Because we get disappointed when we don't get rewarded. We're looking to avoid pain and engage in pleasure. But pleasure doesn't last long. So we have to repeat it again and again and never satisfied. The eternal compensator, the tub of ice cream, is eternal. It never finishes and never satisfies us. So that's the difficulty. We have to find another formula to deal practically with life issues. And so do this by, and he mentions all the methods. And then he says, if you think religion, I'm paraphrasing, I'm adding to it a little bit, if you think religion is to do with doctrines and dogmas and rituals and books and temples and churches and all that, well, have another think, because these are secondary details. These are useful things, but they are tools, like a scaffolding. When the building is finished, scaffolding can easily go. So what is the scaffolding that we have to construct in order to train the mind to be saturated with the reality, to be saturated with a state of bliss and joy? So, in a way, this is a kind of introduction to the subject of Raja Yoga. And first of all, let's discover why this chapter in the Bhagavad Gita is called the sovereign science and the sovereign secret. It's a sovereign secret because it's not an obvious thing. We think that the key to life is in a round of so-called normal activity. But that's just routine maintenance. It's a round of birth, life, death, pain, pleasure, arguments, peace, war, and bring in United Nations and so on, either on the domestic level or international level. This is called life, and we're highly disappointed with it. Not knowing that our mental movement is the one that creates either joy or misery for us. And so this is a secret thing, it's something that is hidden. The key to it is something that is hidden. And it is a science, just as any science is. So it begins by setting up a relationship between what we call Saguna Brahman and Prakriti, nature. That this absolute that is ultimately revealed to us in ourselves and everywhere else will be expressed as an object of a relationship that leads to it. This is called Saguna Brahman, and its expression, its creative expression, is called nature or life. When people ask about cosmology and say, how did everything begin, and so on and so forth, well, we can give them the answer. You see, there's an absolute, and from this absolute is a causal relationship. The causal relationship is something like an apparitional causation. Its components are time and space and causation. We can put function in there as well. And it is through this network that we are able to operate. And from this comes a mind, the cosmic mind, just as a macrocosmic version of our own self. And from that cosmic mind, we find a creativity there, which gives us all the rest. Never mind about looking for a big bang somewhere. We know exactly how it arose. We know how exactly it's being sustained, and we know where it'll all end up. So we have access to this sovereign science and this sovereign secret. Absolutely. The supreme purifier is this. It is realized by direct perception. Raja Vidya, Raja Guhyam. See, it goes like that. Pavitram idam uttamam. Pratyaksha gunam, gamam, I should say. Dharmyam suksham kartam avyayam. It is realized as direct perception, and it's in accord with harmony. It's very easy to practice, and it's imperishable. By looking at the harmony that we find in the whole of the universe, the whole of nature, we get the clue. Some harmonizer is there, and we can have access to it. And so that is the approach in this particular chapter. Now, if we take particularly the Raja Yoga itself, let us see what it has to say. being a text on meditation and taking the words of Joel Goldsmith, is there an approach to this that we haven't picked up on? So most people would think that if everything is full, why should I struggle, is one question that comes. Well, I'm forced to struggle because I feel some want somewhere. As soon as that feeling goes, things change. How does that feeling go? Well, because of this very statement, meditation is a continuous song of gratitude that God is love, that God is here, that God is now. This is a very profound statement, and we have an expression for the absolute. We say that there is Ananda. We say that there is Chit, and we say that there is Sat. Sat means this is existent here and now. That's your now. Chit means that there is a here about it. A here about it is Chit, because we're conscious of this present moment. There's a consciousness. And then, of course, there's Ananda, is love. Now, if our fundamental nature was not like that, then we cannot explain why we wish to struggle. We wish to struggle because there's a center within us, manifested from this essence, which is exactly to do with existence. And then there is an intelligence that comes out afterwards that reaches its height of refinement in man, where we're able to analyze, enjoy cultural things, explore things in our scientific nature, engage in some rational and logic and discussion, shuffle ideas around, creative ideas, express ourselves in poetry and painting. Only man can really do this. So the highest expression of the intelligence is there, but then we find other aspects of intelligence elsewhere, in other animals, for example, even an insect, and you may even go as far as saying, in seemingly inert matter, because the electron knows where the proton is. The electron wants to fly off. The electron is antisocial. It can only live on one level of the atomic flats. It only likes its own accommodation, let us say the third floor. When somebody else moves to the third floor, another electron, it jumps and gives us electrical energy. A photon flies off. And it knows exactly where the proton is. If you were to take a proton, say the size of a football, then its nearest electron would be about 400 meters away, nearly half a kilometer away. Then how does it know? In between is only space. So this buzzing universe is continuously active, and we know that at the most fundamental level as well, that there is no such thing as empty space. When we say space is empty, it means on average. On average, your bank account could be empty, but sometimes there's 100 in, sometimes there's 1,000, and sometimes there's nothing, and sometimes it's a minus, and sometimes you have to take credit and so on. But on average, it's zero. On average, space is empty. And of course, and I think I've said it a number of times before, if you take the 8 billion people on this planet and you remove the space, then you can fit all of humanity into a sphere the size of an apple. Pretty heavy apple, but nonetheless. That's the fact of it. Things are not what they seem to be. So we have to use all of these methods, because if things are not what they seem to be, then the appreciation of that is called jnana yoga, using the intellect. And if things are worthy of being praised and thanked, if we stand in awe of the universe, if we feel the intimacy of the divine presence, this is called bhakti yoga. And when we try to sort the mind and steer it in a specific direction, this is called Raja Yoga. And when we do any activity, we can remove all the stress from it by doing Karma Yoga. And so a combination of all these four methods would be the most desirable. All of them will be a methodology. And within that, there may be substructures to this methodology that we call religious practice, tradition. Provided it has meaning, then it is part of the revealing structure. It is part of cultivating this quality of illumination called sattva. So we have these three forces, and we play with these three forces. These three forces will give us either tremendous difficulties and stress, or it will give us equilibrium of mind, peace of mind. It's up to us. But we have to learn the skill. And in order to learn the skill and practice it, it requires exactly that. It requires practice. And there's no holiday for it. Because every second either drags us down or elevates us up. So let us take a little few lessons from this Raja Yoga and make a few comments on it. And maybe this will be the start of a series on the subject of Raja Yoga as we go through it. Let me give a few small notes of background. First of all, the Yoga Sutras. Sutra means a thread. And so these are aphoristic statements, sometimes in a word, sometimes in a sentence, which are incomplete and require a living commentator to elucidate these things. And so we have various commentators, Vyasa, Vachaspati's gloss on it, and so on. All of these are the ancient commentators. And we're fortunate that in the book Raja Yoga, Swami Vivekananda beautifully synthesizes the purport of these commentators in a very simple way. The whole of the text consists of 4 chapters, 4 sections, nearly 200 of these sutras. And it's part of the aphoristic literature that we find. Another part might be, for example, the Brahma Sutras. And its contracted form easily enables us to memorize the principles. The technique is very simple. If we discuss a subject in great, great detail, you don't have to regurgitate the whole thing. Simply by giving you a trigger phrase, you remember everything. And the example I normally give is, let us see how you can be efficient with time. Supposing we discuss how every second, every minute is a kind of currency for activity and is valuable when you put something useful into it. And we did to talk about all the principles of being efficient and so on. And we have a catchphrase about it, time is money. Actually, if you want to do it, T-I-M-E, time is money exactly. And then you say, okay, now, by repeating this phrase, you now call to mind everything we ever discussed on it just by putting in a headline. Just a trigger. So this is the key to the learning aspect of these aphorisms. So they're threads of wisdom, and they consist only of a word here or groups of words there. And their meaning also can be obscure, unless there's a competent teacher to expand on the principles again. And the encounter with a teacher allows further expansion of the subject matter. At the same time, it provides a student with an opportunity to bask in the glory of holy company. It's not just an academic subject. To examine the disciplined life of someone who's unaffected by what is critical in this analysis, and that is pairs of opposites. Pleasure and pain, these are pairs of opposites. Heat and cold, pairs of opposites. Praise and blame, these are objects which trap us a lot. And so we have to learn to transcend three expressive forces that I've just mentioned, these three gunas, because they bind us. How is it that we are not able to access our freedom? Because these three elements bind us. Knowing that they're there, knowing how to manipulate them and promote one above the others has a neutralizing effect. And in the olden days, of course, a student was often told to look after teacher's cows. Come here, stay with me for a while, look after my cows. Cows was their wealth. And not only was this an exercise in obedience and self-control, but also cultivation of patience. These are all components that are necessary in our spiritual life. And not only is this an exercise in all of that, but the astute student will be able to reflect, shuffle ideas around on truths, and may notice how milk flows, for example, from cows when all it eats is grass. That suitable pastures rely on rainfall, sunshine, seasonal changes, and in the same way, the Lord's grace flows freely and continuously for our benefit. Everything that we experience can be a meditation. And when the student has decided to control the wave patterns of the mind, then of course a suitable teacher is not wanting, because the unconscious is an attractive force. Thought is an attraction. It's a magnetic force. It draws things toward ourselves. Now, of course, who knows what Patanjali was, what era he lived in. Many speculations are around about 300 BCE. Some think that he was identified with the author of the Mahabhashya or the commentary on Panini's grammar and so on and so forth. And Patanjali, that name is used for many other things, grammarian, philosopher, physicians, and so on. But all we can say is that it's the work of, say, several thousand years ago, and expresses specific pre-existing thought currents which are there at that point. So we have to understand that this is part of one of 6 philosophical systems. There's Sankhya, there's Yoga, there's Vaisheshika, there's Nyaya, which is to do with logic. There is Mimamsa and Uttarimamsa, otherwise called Vedanta. 6 of these philosophies are there. We pay most attention to the first 2, the Sankhya and the Yoga, and we pay attention to the last one, the Vedanta. So, how to start off with? There's a small difference in our understanding, because Sankhya is a thoroughly dualistic point of view, atheistic as well, but yoga has a remnant of theism within it, but it is essentially a dualistic system. It says there's something aside called Purusha and something else which is called nature or Prakriti, which is actually eternal. It is one of the fundamental principles. Nature is eternal. It doesn't have a beginning. It just goes into a condition of expression, projection, and potentiality, which we call laya. So the yoga approach is actually one of 4 approaches, and the Patanjali Yoga Sutras will tell us about this philosophy, the philosophy of yoga. Most people that I talk to anyway will say, oh, yoga, yes, that's standing on your head, or maybe somebody else's head, I don't know. But it's a series of physical exercises. And yes, that is a certain type of yoga. But we can remove the misunderstanding to do with the term by calling it union. Then all that confusion is gone. Union with what? In terms of the yoga philosophy, an assumption that Purusha and Prakriti are separate, and that when we know ourselves as Purusha, in other words, a kind of disunion from pain, that is a V-yoga described in the Bhagavad Gita. Yoga is described to define as actually a separation from the attachment to pain, a V-yoga actually. Then we have gotten into this kaivalya, into this apparent separation. Apparent because Our Vedanta philosophy supplements the teaching and says there was no actual separation. It just looks like that. So there are a few differences there, but in terms of a system, I think we all agree on the basic system of the Patanjali Yoga practice. The practice is really summarized as 8 limbs. That's the practical side of it. And these 8 limbs, therefore, will lead us in the meditation process on a royal or regal path. It's called a royal path because all other methods, whether it's worship of God or what have you, indirectly clarify the mind and make it ekagra, one-pointed. That's what we're aiming for in our instrumentation, so that the truth can be revealed from within. But you see, only this Raja Yoga does this directly, showing the why of it, the rationale of it. It aims at controlling the human psyche. So in the spirit of removing any misgivings or any superstitions, the very preface of the book is telling. It starts off like this. Since the dawn of history, various extraordinary phenomena have been recorded as happening among human beings. And witnesses are not wanted in modern times to attest to the fact of such events, even in societies living under the full blaze of modern science. Now, there's a book I often refer to called The Imprisoned Splendor by Reynold Johnson, a great scientist. And he was a scientist who decided there are these phenomena. Let me not make a judgment on it. Let me investigate them and do some scientific tests on them. But the vast mass of such evidence, says Swami Vivekananda, is unreliable as coming from ignorant, superstitious, or fraudulent persons. I always remember reading the life of Houdini, and Houdini was very interested in spiritualism. And of course, in those days, many spiritualist mediums abound. And he then set a challenge, a monetary challenge. Anything that you can do, I will do, but what I do, I will duplicate it. It will be pure illusion. I'm an illusionist. And so nobody claimed the prize. So, fraudulent persons, in many instances, the so-called miracles are imitations. But then the question is, what do they imitate? It's not the sign of a candid and scientific mind to throw overboard anything without proper investigation. Surface scientists, unable to explain the various extraordinary mental phenomena, strive to ignore their very existence. They bypass it. They won't get funding for it, to start with, in the modern scientific context. They're therefore more culpable than those who think that their prayers are answered by a being or beings above the clouds, or than those who believe that their petitions will make such things or such beings change the course of the universe. And what he's clearly saying, and what Raja Yoga is saying, nothing comes from outside. It's all from inside you. Anyway, the latter, that is the superstitious, have the excuse of ignorance, which has taught them dependence upon such things, such beings, a dependence which has become a part of their degenerate nature. The former, that is the scientific people, have no such excuse. And so for thousands of years, such phenomena have been studied, investigated, and generalized. The whole ground of the religious faculties of man has been analyzed. The practical result is, and he puts it, the science of Raja Yoga, the royal path, the regal path. It does not, after the unpardonable manner of some modern scientists, and nothing really has changed, deny the existence of facts which are difficult to explain. On the other hand, it gently, yet in no uncertain terms, tells the superstitious that miracles and answers to prayers and powers of faith, though true as facts, are not rendered comprehensible through the superstitious explanation of attributing them to the agency of a being or beings above the clouds. It declares that each man is only a conduit for the infinite ocean of knowledge and power that lies behind mankind. What a beautiful, beautiful statement. It teaches that desires and wants are in man, that the power of supply is also in man, and that wherever and whenever a desire, a want, or prayer has been fulfilled, it was out of this infinite magazine that the supply came, and not from any supernatural being. Put it in this way, it comes from what we understand to be cosmic mind. What that means is there's only one mind. There's only one storehouse. And the cosmic mind is your supply agent, so to speak. Whatever you think will be delivered unto you. Be careful what you think. If you think that your neighbor's nose is ugly, then beware, you may have to have rhinoplasty on your own nose. Who knows? Forgive the pun. I'm going to leave it there as merely an introduction because I know some of you are studying this text, and I encourage you to study it as a fundamental text. And so I'm going to open the floor, as it were, to questions or comments, either from participants here or from those who are online.
I don't know if this is too specific, whether it's fair. The difference between samskaras and virtues in the Yoga Sutra, are virtues sort of thought waves that are sort of immediate, whereas samskaras are sort of like latent tendencies that have been developed and that are in the subconscious and will manifest later in consciousness.
Okay, so every movement that you make is a mental movement, whether it's a physical movement directed by a certain will or willfulness, or whether it is a thought, whether it's an intention, no matter how fleeting, is an experience. And all of them get recorded. All of them find impressions. So samskara means impressions. It's kind of like a printing press that controls a library, combination of these two things, that what we think here or in the past settles down in the unconscious area, and these are called samskaras. Some of them are useful to us and some of them are not. Generally speaking, samskaras, we can generalize them and say these are our habits, and we are generating them all the time. So these are a kind of vrittis, a kind of series of oscillating waves or whirlpools, more accurately, in the mental field. And they are stirred up from this area of samskaras, no doubt. They come to the surface whenever there's a clue, whenever there is a trigger for them or a suggestion, then it comes up. So it's a part of our memory. Now there are, Patanjali mentions, 5 types of waves, vrittis, in a whole mental field that we call chitta. Chitta, an area of consciousness that gets trapped locally, as it were. And so these vrittis will be right knowledge, wrong knowledge, verbal delusion, which is equivalent to jumping to a conclusion based on your imagination. You must have noticed. And then there is sleep, and there is memory. Now, if you say, what about dreams? Yes, well, dreams are a combination of sleep and memory. The two together are dreams. And these 5 aspects, these 5 wave systems, we'll find are actually equivalent to measured brain waves. Now, it's the brain is just an instrument of this. It's as physical as anything else, and the mind is its subtle component. We make a distinction between brain and mind, but we won't get into any argument about that, since mind and brain, or mind and body, it's all to do with matter. What we see as the body and material things, this is really gross form of it, and mind is the subtle form of it. Probably the subtle portion of the food gets taken off as the mental energy. So that is samskaras. Samskaras is that, and vrittis are any disturbance within the mind, but some of it will be in our favor. It is to do with true knowledge. The opposite of that will be ignorance or false knowledge. Jumping to a conclusion through our imagination, verbal delusion is there, sleep and memory. So samskaras are certainly a kind of vrittis in potentiality, and they come out up as vrittis when poked, when stimulated, and a kind of association. We can register it as a kind of habit level. Now, how to deal with them? We cannot deal with the unconscious mind directly. We have to only control, we only have the conscious mind to steer and control. And that's a very small, proportionately a small part of our mental, of our psyche. And most of us walk around unconscious anyway. So taking that small window of consciousness called attention, we can steer it in a deliberate, chosen way to elevate the mind itself and purify the mind. And you'll see that in the second sutra, which is given, there's a vast commentary on the geography of the mind, as laid out principally by the Samkhyas. And that means that there is an instrumentality of the senses. There is the external senses, the internal senses are part of the psyche, the mind. And then there is the mind itself, the vast bulk of activities within that. There is the intellect portion of it as well, that is an executive officer, a willing thing, a directing thing, a determinative faculty. And then there is the real self, which is the shining component that lends its inherent intelligence to all the others. So that's the pattern of the arrangement of the psyche, the instrument, and that instrument is called antakarana. In English, we mix it up and we say mind, but antakarana is a much more suggestive, a much more accurate way of viewing the mind, because it is said to be an internal instrument. Body is an external instrument. Mind is an internal instrument. We make sure that the body operates correctly so that we can coordinate with the mind. And then we make sure also that the mind is clear and clean. And we do this by a system of self-discipline, a system of self-control, a system of directing the will. And all of this is intrinsic to any path or system that we choose. It is all to do with clearing the mind, clarifying the mind, because the mind is something like a wave system, and the waves are generally disturbing. The effect of egocentric waves will produce a layer of ignorance where we have no clarity. We cannot see the bottom of the lake. The whole thing is compared to a lake in turmoil. The only thing that sorts it out is to promote sattva. If you're a Buddhist, you'll recognize it as the Eightfold Path: right thinking, right occupation, right meditation, all of these things. In other words, It's promoting something which has no egocentricity within it. It only has compassion, a spirit of generosity, and so on. This is that kind of wave that is called right, that is true. So in other words, there's one kind of wave system that is dealing with truth, one is dealing with falsehood, one is dealing with memory, one is dealing with verbal delusion, and one is dealing with sleep. And our task, if you will accept it, is to make all of that tranquil. And that's set out in the second sutra straight away. Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Good. Well, we leave it for now. It's 5 minutes past 9. We've gone over 5 minutes. Good. Thank you.
Thank you, Swami.
Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace,
Thank
peace.
you, Swami.
Thank you.
Thank you, Swami.
Swamiji.
Thank you.
After I
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swami.